You're nothing but a troublemaker from the projects. Look at me when I'm sentencing you, Judge Reginald Thorne snarled. The gavel crashed down as 17-year-old Nyla stood frozen before him. The all-white courtroom audience snickered. Judge Reginald Thorne descended from his bench, invading her personal space. He snatched her court documents and let them scatter across the floor. Pick them up now. His shoe tapped impatiently as she knelt to gather the papers. Her public defender remained silent, eyes averted. Remember your place, Judge Reginald Thorne sneered, strutting back to his position of power. Nyla's jaw tightened. She gripped her small notebook like a shield against her chest. The notebook in her trembling hands contained evidence that would obliterate Judge Reginald Thorne's career within hours. Nyla adjusted her modest blue blouse, the nicest one she owned, as she walked beside her father, Darius, whose maintenance uniform was freshly pressed. They couldn't afford to miss work, but they couldn't afford a private attorney either. "Remember what I told you," Darius whispered. "Stand straight, speak clearly, look them in the eye." Nyla nodded, clutching her notebook. Inside, pages of careful observations filled the margins. She had been preparing for weeks. Their assigned public defender, Mr. Caldwell, met them in the hallway. He shuffled through his overflowing case files, finally locating Nyla's paperwork. Harper, Nyla Harper. Right. The hotel trespassing. Mr. Caldwell barely made eye contact. "Judge Reginald Thorne's courtroom today. Look, you should take the plea deal. First offense. Well, technically second if we count that park incident." "But I wasn't," Nyla began. Mr. Caldwell cut her off. "Thorne is tough on people like you. Take the deal. Community service beats juvenile detention." Across town, Judge Reginald Thorne adjusted his silk tie in the mirror of his Westlake mansion. His wife placed his coffee precisely where he expected it. "Juvenile cases today," he complained, checking his Rolex. "Delinquents wasting the court's time. There's one about trespassing at the Sterling Hotel." He pulled out his phone and speed dialed. "Victor, it's Reginald about that trespasser at your hotel. Don't worry, I'll make an example of them. Can't have people thinking they can walk into establishments where they don't belong." Back at the courthouse, Nyla sat quietly observing the proceedings before her case. A white teenager caught shoplifting received a stern warning and 20 hours of community service. Another white defendant with vandalism charges got a reduced fine after his father spoke to the judge. Then a black teenager appeared, charged with loitering. Judge Reginald Thorne's demeanor transformed instantly. His voice became cold and condescending. "The sentence, maximum community service and a substantial fine." Nyla's hand moved quickly across her notebook page. Her observations grew more detailed with each case. As the bailiff called, "Harper, Nyla." A sharp-eyed woman in the back row sat forward, her attention locked on Judge Reginald Thorne. Nyla approached the defendant's table, steps measured and deliberate. Judge Reginald Thorne barely looked up from his papers, a dismissive frown forming at the corners of his mouth. "Another trespassing case," he sighed dramatically. "Seems to be an epidemic of young people thinking they can go wherever they please." Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender in this context. We're prepared to discuss a reasonable penalty." "Second-time offender?" Judge Reginald Thorne interrupted, tapping a folder. "I see a prior incident at Westside Park after hours." "I was studying," Nyla said quietly. "The lights at home went out again. The park has benches under streetlights." Judge Reginald Thorne's eyebrows rose. "Did I ask you to speak? Mr. Caldwell, control your client." The prosecutor stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, the defendant was discovered in a restricted area of the Sterling Hotel, specifically near the executive conference rooms where valuable equipment is stored. Security footage confirms she had no legitimate business there. What do you have to say for yourself? Judge Reginald Thorne addressed Nyla directly now, leaning forward. I was there for a program, she began. A program? Judge Reginald Thorne scoffed. The Sterling Hotel doesn't run programs for. He stopped himself, but his implication hung in the air. Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell interjected weakly. Perhaps a fine and standard community service would. Mr. Caldwell, this court takes trespassing in upscale establishments seriously. It begins with trespassing, ends with theft. Judge Reginald Thorne's gaze slid over Nyla's neat but modest clothing. The defendant has already shown a pattern of being where she doesn't belong. Nyla's father shifted in his seat, knuckles white against his knees. A court officer stepped slightly closer to him in warning. Throughout the exchange, Nyla wrote in her notebook, her pen moving steadily across the page. Judge Reginald Thorne noticed. What are you writing? He demanded suddenly. Nyla looked up, startled. Just notes, Your Honor. Hand it over. Judge Reginald Thorne extended his palm. This is my courtroom, not your classroom. Nyla hesitated, then slowly passed her notebook forward. The bailiff took it to Judge Reginald Thorne, who flipped through the pages with growing irritation. Judge Reginald Thorne's mocking smile faltered when he saw detailed documentation of his courtroom patterns, complete with dates, quotes, and statistical notations. His face tightened momentarily before his practiced judicial mask returned. He snapped the notebook shut and tossed it back toward Nyla with exaggerated disdain. Quite the little researcher, aren't we? He sneered. Taking notes won't change the facts of your case. He leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. I've decided that a standard community service arrangement is insufficient here. Ms. Harper clearly has an attitude problem that needs addressing. Mr. Caldwell started to object, but Judge Reginald Thorne silenced him with a raised hand. Stand up, Miss Harper, he commanded. Come to the center of the courtroom. Nyla rose slowly, uncertainty in every movement. The courtroom watched as she stepped forward, standing alone on the cold marble floor. Now, Judge Reginald Thorne continued, satisfaction creeping into his voice. I want you to explain to everyone present why you thought you belonged in a 5-star hotel like the Sterling. What possible legitimate reason could you have? I was invited to, Nyla began. Speak up, Judge Reginald Thorne barked. The court reporter can't hear your mumbling. Nyla swallowed hard. I was invited to participate in a program. A program? Judge Reginald Thorne repeated, drawing out each syllable for the audience's benefit. And who exactly invited you to this mysterious program? The National Merit Scholarship? He laughed, cutting her off. The National Merit Scholarship Program doesn't meet in hotel conference rooms. They meet in schools, universities. He addressed the courtroom directly. Creative. I'll give her that. Whispers rippled through the spectators. Nyla stood perfectly still, her face a careful mask hiding the humiliation burning beneath. Turn around, Miss Harper, Judge Reginald Thorne instructed. Let everyone see your idea of appropriate courtroom attire. Nyla hesitated. That wasn't a suggestion, he snapped. She turned slowly in a circle, her simple blue blouse and dark skirt modest and clean, if not expensive. Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell finally spoke up, this is highly irregular and potentially... Mr. Caldwell, are you questioning my methods? Judge Reginald Thorne's voice dropped dangerously. Because I can hold you in contempt as easily as your client. Mr. Caldwell subsided immediately. Judge Reginald Thorne lifted his phone. I have Victor Langston, owner of the Sterling Hotel, on the line. Mr. Langston, was there any educational program scheduled in your conference rooms on Tuesday afternoon? A tiny voice responded through the speaker. Absolutely not, Your Honor. Our conference center is exclusively for business clients and hotel events. Security reported the young woman near our Platinum Suite, where we keep valuable equipment. Throughout this exchange, the woman in the back row continued observing, her tablet now recording every word. Two well-dressed individuals slipped in beside her, conferring in hushed tones. Nyla stood alone in the center of the courtroom, back straight despite the public humiliation. A single tear threatened at the corner of her eye, but she blinked it back fiercely. Thank you, Mr. Langston. Judge Reginald Thorne concluded the call. The court appreciates your time. He turned his attention back to Nyla. Still maintain you were there for a program? Yes, Your Honor, she answered, her voice steadier than before, defiant to the end. Judge Reginald Thorne sighed theatrically. Nyla's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't reach for it. The screen flashed briefly with a message. Hold steady. Justice incoming. You're not alone. Court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Reginald Thorne announced abruptly. Miss Harper, don't leave the building. We're not finished with your case. The bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Reginald Thorne exited. The moment he was gone, whispers erupted throughout the courtroom. Nyla returned to her seat, face carefully composed despite the humiliation still burning in her chest. I need to use the restroom, she whispered to her father. Darius nodded, concern etched in every line of his face. You're handling this with more strength than I could, he said softly. I'm proud of you. Nyla slipped away, finding refuge in the courthouse bathroom. Only there, in a locked stall, did she allow herself a moment of vulnerability. Silent tears streamed down her face as she gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white with tension. She splashed cold water on her face, erasing the evidence of her tears. The bathroom door swung open. Nyla straightened, composing herself. A black woman in her 40s entered, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit. She was the same woman who had been watching from the back row. Nyla Harper? She asked, voice low and confident. Nyla tensed. Yes. Dr. Naomi Ellis, Educational Director for the National Merit Scholarship Program. She extended a business card with the organization's embossed logo. I believe we had an appointment at the Sterling Hotel that was interrupted. Recognition flashed across Nyla's face. Dr. Ellis. But the hotel owner said, Victor Langston doesn't personally manage conference bookings, Dr. Ellis explained. Our event was arranged through their corporate office, not the local management. We booked the same space quarterly through their diversity initiative program. She leaned against the counter. I must apologize for not intervening sooner. When you didn't arrive for your interview, we investigated. What I've witnessed today is disturbing, but not, unfortunately, surprising. Dr. Ellis gestured toward Nyla's notebook. Your documentation of Thorne's behavior caught our attention. We've received similar reports from other minority students over the past year. Meanwhile, in his chambers, Judge Reginald Thorne loosened his tie and answered his private line. Reg, it's Senator Desmond Kane. Wanted to give you a heads up. Judicial review appointments are coming up next month. There's been some chatter about diversity on the bench. Judge Reginald Thorne laughed. Political correctness gone mad. Don't worry about me. 20 years on this bench and no one has successfully challenged my rulings yet. Still might want to tread carefully, Senator Kane warned. Actually handling one of those cases now, Judge Reginald Thorne replied. Another delinquent who needs to learn respect for private property. Making an example of her as we speak. Back in the bathroom, Dr. Ellis made several calls in rapid succession. First to the hotel's corporate headquarters, confirming the scholarship program booking. Next to the State Judicial Review Board, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Yes, it's happening exactly as reported, she said. We're witnessing it firsthand. She listened briefly. Understood. Everything's being documented. Her final call was to a senior partner at Marshall and Reed Law offices. Thomas, Naomi Ellis, we need that pro bono representation we discussed. Today, right now actually. She turned to Nyla. We've been building a case against Thorne for months. Your detailed notes provided exactly the pattern evidence we needed, but we required clear documentation of his behavior in court. The bathroom door opened again. Darius entered cautiously. Nyla, are you okay? Dr. Ellis introduced herself, quickly outlining the situation. Mr. Harper, your daughter was legitimately at that hotel for a scholarship interview. Judge Reginald Thorne's treatment of her today is part of a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior from the bench. Darius's expression shifted from confusion to determination. What do we do? Return to the courtroom. Nyla needs to remain composed, no matter what Thorne says or does. The truth will come out, but timing is crucial. Nyla took a deep breath. I can do this. As they prepared to return, Nyla noticed the badge clipped to the lanyard of Dr. Ellis's colleague who had just joined them. The insignia read, Governor's Ethics Commission, Special Investigation Unit. The woman caught Nyla's eye and tapped her tablet deliberately, confirming that every word, every action in that courtroom was being recorded. Court resumed with a sharp bang of Judge Reginald Thorne's gavel. His mood appeared to have darkened during the recess, his mouth set in a tight line as Nyla returned to her place at the defendant's table. After consideration, Judge Reginald Thorne announced without preamble, I've determined an appropriate penalty for Ms. Harper's offense and continued dishonesty. He shuffled papers for dramatic effect. The defendant will write a public apology to be published in the county newspaper acknowledging her trespassing and dishonesty before this court. Additionally, she will complete 200 hours of community service. A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom at the unusually harsh sentence. Furthermore, Judge Reginald Thorne continued, satisfaction evident in his tone, that community service will be performed at the Sterling Hotel itself. Perhaps cleaning bathrooms will teach a more lasting lesson about respecting private property than empty words could. Mr. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, that seems excessive for a first time. Second offense, Judge Reginald Thorne corrected sharply. And given the defendant's attitude, I believe it's entirely appropriate. Do you wish to object formally, Mr. Caldwell? Perhaps risk a contempt citation yourself? Mr. Caldwell deflated visibly. No, Your Honor. Very well, then. Objection. The word cut through the courtroom. All heads turned as a tall man in an expensive suit rose from the back row and strode forward. Quentin Hale, Your Honor. Marshall and Reed Law offices. I'll be taking over Ms. Harper's defense effective immediately. Judge Reginald Thorne's face flushed. This is highly irregular, Mr. Hale. We're in the middle of sentencing. Which is precisely why I'm intervening now, Attorney Hale replied smoothly, placing his credentials before the court. My motion to substitute as counsel has already been filed with the clerk. Since no formal sentence has been entered into the record, we're well within procedural bounds. Judge Reginald Thorne examined the paperwork, searching for any technicality to refuse it. Finding none, he nodded curtly. Fine, Mr. Caldwell. You're excused. Mr. Caldwell gathered his papers, relief evident as he retreated. Attorney Hale wasted no time. Your Honor, the defense moves that all charges against Ms. Harper be dismissed immediately due to lack of evidence and improper procedure. Denied, Judge Reginald Thorne snapped. Then I must inquire, Attorney Hale continued calmly, why Miss Harper's case is receiving such unusual treatment compared to similar cases heard earlier today. Judge Reginald Thorne's knuckles whitened around his gavel. Each case is unique, Counselor. Indeed, Attorney Hale agreed, producing a folder. which is why I've taken the liberty of reviewing your court records for the past 6 months. There appears to be a statistical anomaly in sentencing patterns based on defendant characteristics. Are you accusing this court of impropriety? Judge Reginald Thorne's voice rose dangerously. I'm simply entering facts into the record, Your Honor, Attorney Hale replied. More observers entered the courtroom quietly, some taking notes, others watching Judge Reginald Thorne intently. I'll hold you in contempt, Judge Reginald Thorne threatened. Your Honor, Attorney Hale said with unruffled calm, I request that the court record reflect your hostility toward the defense's legitimate inquiry. Would you like to explain why the defendant's legitimate reason for being at the hotel wasn't verified before this proceeding began? Judge Reginald Thorne straightened in his chair, jaw working beneath flushed skin. The courtroom fell silent, spectators leaning forward in anticipation. The owner of the Sterling Hotel verified no such program existed. He stated flatly, His word is sufficient for this court. Is it? Attorney Hale removed a document from his briefcase. I submit as evidence confirmation from the Sterling Hotel's corporate events office, documenting that the National Merit Scholarship Program reserved the Oakwood Conference Room from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. on the date in question. He approached the bench, offering the document. Judge Reginald Thorne took it reluctantly, eyes scanning the official letterhead. Furthermore, Attorney Hale continued, Ms. Harper was there by specific invitation, as evidenced by this email from Dr. Naomi Ellis, Educational Director of the program. The prosecutor rose hesitantly. Your Honor, the state wasn't provided with this evidence. Because no one bothered to investigate, Attorney Hale responded. The defense shouldn't have to prove innocence when the prosecution hasn't established guilt. Judge Reginald Thorne's phone rang. He answered it on speaker, maintaining the pretense of judicial authority. Mr. Langston, were you aware of any National Merit Scholarship event at your hotel last Tuesday? Mr. Langston's voice sounded less certain now. I don't personally handle all bookings, Your Honor. The corporate office sometimes arranges events without my direct involvement. So you testified earlier without complete knowledge, Attorney Hale interjected. Objection, the prosecutor called out. Sustained, Judge Reginald Thorne said quickly. Mr. Hale, you will not interrogate witnesses without permission. More officials entered the courtroom. A woman with a State Bar Association badge took a seat in the front row, notebook open. Judge Reginald Thorne noticed the growing audience, sweat beating at his temples despite the courtroom's air conditioning. He tugged at his collar, attempting to regain control of the proceedings that were rapidly slipping away. The court will take these new documents under advisement, Judge Reginald Thorne announced. However, this last-minute evidence appears designed to ambush the court and the prosecution. With respect, Your Honor, Attorney Hale countered, proper investigation would have revealed these facts before Ms. Harper was publicly humiliated. One phone call to verify her story would have sufficed. Judge Reginald Thorne turned his frustration toward Nyla. The defendant should have spoken up more clearly about her alleged appointment. Your Honor, Attorney Hale said, voice hardening for the first time. Ms. Harper attempted to explain multiple times. Court transcripts will show you interrupted her repeatedly and dismissed her explanations without consideration. The mood in the courtroom shifted palpably. Spectators exchanged glances, some nodding in recognition of the truth being spoken. The prosecutor busied himself with papers, clearly distancing himself from Judge Reginald Thorne's approach. Judge Reginald Thorne checked his watch with theatrical impatience. This court's time is valuable, Mr. Hale. We can't afford to waste it on prolonged discussion of a simple trespassing case. Attorney Hale maintained perfect composure, hands clasped before him. The contrast between his professional demeanor and Judge Reginald Thorne's increasing agitation became more pronounced with each exchange. Speaking of time, Your Honor, Attorney Hale said evenly, Perhaps you could explain why cases involving minority defendants consistently receive more of your valuable court time than those involving white defendants. How dare you! Judge Reginald Thorne exploded, slamming his gavel with such force that the sound echoed like a gunshot through the courtroom. This is contempt of court. One more insinuation like that and I'll have you removed. Attorney Hale didn't flinch. I'm simply asking about a statistical anomaly in your court records, Your Honor. Public records show minority defendants receive an average of 43 minutes of court time, while white defendants average 17 minutes for comparable charges. Clear the courtroom, Judge Reginald Thorne shouted, face mottled with rage. Everyone but essential personnel out. No one moved. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, looking between Judge Reginald Thorne and the growing number of official observers. Attorney Hale remained unruffled. I'd like to call Dr. Naomi Ellis to provide context regarding Ms. Harper's presence at the Sterling Hotel. Before Judge Reginald Thorne could object, Dr. Ellis approached the witness stand. After being sworn in, she sat with perfect posture, credentials displayed prominently on the lanyard around her neck. Dr. Ellis, Attorney Hale began, please explain the National Merit Scholarship Program and specifically why Nyla Harper was at the Sterling Hotel. The National Merit Scholarship Program identifies exceptional students from underrepresented communities, Dr. Ellis explained. Nyla Harper came to our attention through her extraordinary academic achievements despite limited resources. She maintains a 4.0 GPA while working part-time and volunteering at her community library. Judge Reginald Thorne interrupted. This character testimony is irrelevant to the trespassing charge. It speaks directly to motive, Your Honor, Attorney Hale countered. Ms. Harper had legitimate business at that location, which negates the essential element of the trespassing charge. Dr. Ellis continued. We conduct interviews at the Sterling Hotel specifically because it provides a professional, neutral environment for evaluations. Candidates come from multiple districts. Judge Reginald Thorne leaned forward. Why not meet at a school or public library? Why a luxury hotel? We want our candidates to feel valued, Dr. Ellis replied evenly. Many come from neighborhoods where professional environments are limited. The hotel partnership demonstrates our commitment to treating these scholars with the same respect afforded to business executives. The prosecutor, sensing the shifting tide, stood. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the state requests time to investigate these claims before proceeding. Judge Reginald Thorne ignored him, fixating instead on Nyla, who sat with quiet dignity, her notebook open on the table before her. She continued to write, documenting every word of the proceedings. Miss Harper, Judge Reginald Thorne snapped, I've had enough of your note-taking. Hand over that notebook immediately. Attorney Hale stood. Objection, Your Honor. Those notes constitute private attorney-client communications and work product. Judge Reginald Thorne's patience shattered. I want to see what she's writing about my courtroom. The admission hung in the air, revealing his true concern, not justice, but his reputation. Nyla looked up, meeting Judge Reginald Thorne's gaze directly for the first time. The room fell silent, tension stretching between them like a wire about to snap. Actually, Nyla said, her voice clear and steady, I'm happy to explain exactly what I've been documenting if you're prepared for everyone to hear it. The silence in the courtroom deepened. Judge Reginald Thorne's momentary satisfaction at Nyla's apparent surrender quickly faded as he registered the confidence in her voice. Proceed, he said, caution creeping into his tone. Nyla rose, standing straight-backed before the court. Gone was the intimidated teenager from earlier. In her place stood a young woman with purpose, radiating from every inch of her slender frame. For the past 7 months, she began, I've been tracking judicial misconduct across multiple courtrooms for a student research project on equal justice in our county's legal system. She opened her notebook, revealing meticulous charts, graphs, and dated entries. What began as a school assignment evolved when I noticed disturbing patterns. Defendants of color consistently receive harsher sentences than white defendants for identical charges. Dismissal rates for white defendants are 78% higher. Court-appointed attorneys for minority defendants are given an average of 4.3 minutes to consult before proceedings, while attorneys for white defendants average 12.7 minutes. Judge Reginald Thorne attempted to interrupt, but Attorney Hale raised his hand. Your Honor, you specifically requested that Ms. Harper explain her documentation. Please allow her to finish. Nyla continued, her voice growing stronger. I tracked 137 cases across 3 county courtrooms, including 42 in this courtroom specifically. The data shows systemic disparities that cannot be explained by case differences alone. She turned a page in her notebook. Judge Reginald Thorne, in your courtroom specifically, black defendants receive sentences averaging 67% longer than white defendants for identical charges. You interrupt black defendants an average of 7.2 times per hearing, compared to 1.3 times for white defendants. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Reginald Thorne pounded his gavel ineffectively. This is preposterous, the ramblings of a child with no understanding of the justice system. Dr. Ellis stood. Nyla Harper is not just any student, Your Honor. She's the youngest ever recipient of the State Youth Leadership Award presented by Governor Harlan Pierce last year. Her research project on justice system disparities has been selected for national presentation at the Constitutional Rights Foundation's Youth Summit. Dr. Ellis approached the bench, producing a folder. Her meeting at the Sterling Hotel served 2 purposes: the scholarship interview and a meeting with the hotel's corporate counsel about their community initiatives, which she's evaluating as potential models for judicial reform. The mysterious woman from the back row stepped forward, badge prominently displayed. Director Lydia Voss, State Judicial Ethics Committee. Judge Reginald Thorne, we've been monitoring your courtroom after receiving multiple formal complaints about discriminatory treatment. Director Voss gestured to her colleagues. Our committee has reviewed Ms. Harper's preliminary findings and found them consistent with our own investigations. Her statistical methodology is remarkably sophisticated for someone her age. Judge Reginald Thorne's face paled. This is an ambush, a setup. No, Your Honor, Director Voss replied calmly. This is accountability. Ms. Harper acted independently, but her documentation provides additional evidence for our ongoing investigation. Judge Reginald Thorne attempted to regain control. None of this changes the fact that the defendant was trespassing at the Sterling Hotel. Attorney Hale approached with a tablet. Security footage from the Sterling Hotel, Your Honor. It clearly shows Ms. Harper being escorted to the Oakwood conference room by hotel staff exactly as she claimed. He played the video. Nyla appeared presenting identification at the front desk. A staff member in a hotel uniform guided her toward the elevators. The timestamp matched exactly with the alleged trespassing incident. The trespassing allegation itself was false, Attorney Hale stated firmly. Ms. Harper had permission to be on the premises, was there for legitimate business purposes, and was in an authorized area. Director Voss addressed the court directly. The Ethics Committee has been compiling evidence on Judge Reginald Thorne for months. We needed clear documentation of his behavior in court with multiple witnesses. Today's proceedings provided exactly that. Judge Reginald Thorne looked around the courtroom, finally recognizing the trap that had closed around him. State officials lined the back wall. Court reporters documented every word. Several respected attorneys from major firms sat in observation. This is a witch hunt, he sputtered. I've served on this bench for 20 years. Yes, Director Voss agreed. And during those 20 years, you've demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory behavior that undermines the fundamental principle of equal justice under law. She opened an official folder, extracting a document bearing the state seal. Judge Reginald Thorne, by authority of the State Judicial Ethics Committee and the Supreme Court of this state, you are hereby suspended from the bench, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into judicial misconduct, abuse of power, and systematic discrimination in your courtroom. The gavel fell from Judge Reginald Thorne's hand, hitting the bench with a dull thud that echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. Within hours, the county courthouse transformed into a hive of urgent activity. In the main courtroom, Chief Judge Rosalind Hayes presided over an emergency hearing regarding Nyla's case. Her demeanor contrasted sharply with Judge Reginald Thorne's, attentive, measured, and genuinely concerned. After reviewing the evidence, Chief Judge Rosalind Hayes announced, "This court dismisses all charges against Nyla Harper with prejudice. The record will show these charges were without merit and improperly pursued." She looked directly at Nyla. "Ms. Harper, on behalf of this court and our justice system, I extend a formal apology for your treatment today. What you experienced represents a failure of the principles we are sworn to uphold." Victor Langston, owner of the Sterling Hotel, sat uncomfortably in the gallery. After the hearing, he approached Nyla and her father. "Ms. Harper, I want to personally apologize," he said, extending his hand. "I spoke without full knowledge of the situation and contributed to this injustice. After learning about your research, I'd like to offer you an internship in our corporate social responsibility department. Your perspective would be invaluable." Across town at the Judicial Ethics Committee headquarters, Director Lydia Voss and her team began the monumental task of reviewing Judge Reginald Thorne's case history. Analysts pulled digital records while others compiled physical documentation dating back years. "The pattern is even clearer than we suspected," Director Voss told her deputy, scrolling through a data visualization on her screen. Minority defendants received sentences averaging 60% longer than white defendants for identical charges. First-time white offenders received probation at 7 times the rate of minority offenders. A junior analyst entered with another report. "Director, we've identified 23 cases with particularly egregious sentencing disparities. 3 defendants are still incarcerated despite circumstances nearly identical to white defendants who received probation." Director Voss nodded grimly. "Flag those for immediate review. Contact the public defender's office. We need to file motions for reconsideration." The media descended with predictable hunger. Initial headlines focused on the sensational. Teen turns tables on biased judge. Student researcher exposes courthouse corruption. Television crews camped outside the courthouse, competing for interviews with anyone connected to the case. By evening, more thoughtful coverage emerged. The State Tribune published an in-depth analysis titled "Systemic Bias: When Those Who Judge Are Not Judged." Legal experts appeared on news panels discussing the broader implications. "What happened today represents both a failure and a success," Professor Nadia Sterling, a judicial ethics expert, explained during a primetime interview. "The failure is that a judge was allowed to demonstrate bias for years without consequence. The success is that finally, through the diligence of a remarkable young woman and proper oversight, accountability arrived. Nyla found herself thrust into an unexpected spokesperson role. At a hastily arranged press conference, she stood beside Dr. Naomi Ellis, composed despite the forest of microphones before her. My research wasn't about targeting any individual, she explained carefully. It was about documenting patterns that affect real people's lives every day. One biased judge can impact thousands of families over a career. Her research, combined with the Ethics Committee's findings, provided compelling evidence for legislative action. State Senator Marcus Hale announced plans to introduce the Judicial Accountability Act the following week. Nyla received an invitation to speak at the press conference announcing the bill. Ms. Harper's meticulous documentation provided the evidence we've needed, Senator Hale told reporters. This legislation will establish independent review of sentencing patterns, mandatory bias training, and a more transparent process for judicial appointments. At the Sterling Hotel's corporate headquarters, executives launched an internal investigation into how the miscommunication occurred. They discovered that Victor Langston's executive assistant, Elliot Palmer, deliberately failed to inform him about educational programs using their facilities. "I didn't think those kinds of events belonged at our establishment," Palmer admitted during his termination interview. "They don't generate revenue and attract the wrong element." His dismissal was immediate, accompanied by a company-wide directive on the hotel's inclusion initiatives and non-discrimination policies. Judge Reginald Thorne retreated to his Westlake mansion, doors locked against the media camped outside. He hired Harlan Croft, a high-profile defense attorney known for representing disgraced public officials. "Judge Reginald Thorne's comments have been taken out of context," Croft told reporters from the driveway. "His distinguished career speaks for itself. We are confident that a full and fair review will exonerate him from these politically motivated accusations." The statement backfired when the Ethics Committee released transcripts of Judge Reginald Thorne's courtroom remarks from multiple cases, revealing a consistent pattern of condescension and bias toward minority defendants. Even his political allies began distancing themselves, their statements evolving from strong support to waiting for all the facts. Governor Harlan Pierce addressed the situation during a scheduled press conference. "The integrity of our justice system depends on fairness and impartiality from every judge in every courtroom. My administration takes these allegations extremely seriously. We will follow the Ethics Committee's investigation closely and take appropriate action based on their findings." Behind closed doors, the governor's legal counsel reviewed options for removing Judge Reginald Thorne permanently if the investigation confirmed the allegations. They also began considering potential replacements, with an emphasis on candidates with demonstrated commitments to equal justice. The State Bar Association announced its own investigation into potential ethics violations by Judge Reginald Thorne. "Judicial misconduct of this nature, if confirmed, represents a serious breach of professional ethics," their statement read. "The Bar Association is committed to maintaining the highest standards of legal practice, including on the bench." Former defendants from Judge Reginald Thorne's court began coming forward with their stories. Community legal aid organizations established a hotline for those who believed they had received biased treatment. Within days, they recorded over 200 calls. Attorney Quentin Hale's law firm, Marshall and Reed, announced they would provide pro bono representation for appeals in the most egregious cases. "Equal justice isn't just an ideal," Attorney Hale told the press. "It's a constitutional guarantee that must be enforced." Nyla returned to school the following Monday, attempting to resume normal life despite her newfound recognition. Classmates and teachers regarded her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Her history teacher asked her to speak to the class about civic engagement and the justice system. "Sometimes change starts with simply paying attention," she told her peers. "Documenting what you see, speaking up when something isn't right." As the second week of investigations began, a forensic audit of Judge Reginald Thorne's communications revealed something even more damning. Emails between Judge Reginald Thorne and certain prosecutors showed coordination to target specific types of defendants with explicit discussion of maintaining deterrent sentencing in problem communities. The Ethics Committee immediately forwarded these communications to the State Attorney General's office, transforming the case from professional misconduct to potential criminal conspiracy. The State Judicial Center's largest hearing room reached capacity an hour before proceedings began. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking in silent witness. Security guards checked credentials at every entrance. William Reginald Thorne entered through a side door, avoiding the media gauntlet outside. His expensive suit hung slightly loose on his frame, evidence of weight lost during 2 sleepless weeks. Harlan Croft walked beside him, whispering last-minute advice. Gone was Judge Reginald Thorne's imperious stride and confident smirk. He took his seat at the respondent's table with uncharacteristic meekness, eyes downcast. The irony escaped no one. The judge, now judged, sitting exactly where countless defendants once trembled before him. The 5-member Judicial Review Panel entered, led by Justice Sophia Laurent from the State Supreme Court. Their faces revealed nothing as they took their positions. This hearing will determine whether Judge Reginald Thorne has violated the Judicial Code of Conduct and Constitution of this state, Justice Laurent announced. These proceedings are not criminal in nature, but will establish whether Judge Reginald Thorne remains fit to serve on the bench. Director Lydia Voss presented the Ethics Committee's findings first. Evidence mounted in methodical, devastating sequence. Statistical analysis of Judge Reginald Thorne's sentencing patterns. Testimony from former defendants, court transcripts revealing discriminatory treatment, and the damning private communications. In this email, Director Voss highlighted on the projection screen, Judge Reginald Thorne specifically instructs Prosecutor Bryce Langford to seek maximum penalties for defendants from what he terms problem neighborhoods, while offering diversion programs for kids who made mistakes from good areas. Judge Reginald Thorne's former clerk, Isabella Ruiz, testified about being instructed to schedule certain types of cases strategically. Judge Reginald Thorne wanted specific prosecutors assigned to cases involving minority defendants, she explained. He called it matching the right attorney to the right case, but it was clearly about ensuring harsher outcomes. As evidence accumulated, Judge Reginald Thorne's defense strategy crumbled. Former allies abandoned him one by one. Victor Langston, initially called as a character witness, instead provided a sworn statement about Judge Reginald Thorne's previous comments regarding keeping undesirables away from establishments like the Sterling. He told me during a golf game that strict sentencing was necessary to maintain property values and keep certain elements where they belong. Langston's statement read, "At the time, I didn't challenge these comments. That failure of moral courage is something I now deeply regret." Even more damaging, Assistant District Attorney Bryce Langford admitted to feeling pressured by Judge Reginald Thorne. There was an unspoken understanding, he testified. If you didn't pursue the sentences he wanted, your cases wouldn't be scheduled favorably. Young prosecutors who needed wins to advance their careers understood this clearly. As the second day of hearings concluded, Judge Reginald Thorne requested permission to make a statement. Justice Laurent granted his request, perhaps hoping for contrition. Judge Reginald Thorne approached the podium slowly. He began with practiced humility, expressing regret for any misunderstandings and citing his 20 years of dedicated service. But as questioning from the panel intensified, his veneer cracked. "You don't understand the realities of maintaining order," he snapped when Justice Laurent pressed him about the email evidence. "Someone has to make tough decisions to keep communities safe. And those tough decisions just happen to fall disproportionately on minority defendants?" Justice Laurent asked. Judge Reginald Thorne's restraint finally shattered. "Look at the statistics. Look at where the crime comes from. Someone needs to keep these communities in line, or we all suffer. I was doing what needed to be done while the rest of you hide behind political correctness." A collective gasp rippled through the hearing room. Camera operators zoomed in on Judge Reginald Thorne's flushed face as he continued his tirade. You want to know the truth? Fine. Some people respond to second chances. Others only understand consequences. I gave each what they needed, and I make no apologies for it. The outburst confirmed every allegation against him. Court reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, capturing every damning word. Within minutes, his statement trended across social media platforms, the unvarnished prejudice impossible to misinterpret. The panel deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning their unanimous decision. This panel finds that Judge Reginald Thorne has egregiously violated the Judicial Code of Conduct through demonstrated bias, abuse of power, and actions that have undermined public faith in our justice system. Justice Laurent announced, "We recommend his permanent removal from the bench and referral to the State Bar Association for disbarment proceedings." She continued, her voice firm. Additionally, we are referring our findings to the Attorney General's office for review of potential civil rights violations under state and federal law. Judge Reginald Thorne sat motionless, the reality of his complete downfall finally sinking in. 20 years of power and prestige evaporated in 2 weeks. As Judge Reginald Thorne shuffled from the hearing room in defeat, he froze in the hallway. Nyla stood directly in his path. A documentary crew captured the moment his eyes met those of the young woman who had catalyzed his downfall. 6 months passed, each bringing fresh waves of reform across the state's judicial landscape. The Thorne case, once headline news, had transformed into something more significant, a catalyst for systemic change. In the Capitol, Chief Justice Lena Monroe addressed the annual judicial conference. Hundreds of judges filled the auditorium. The integrity of our system depends not just on the letter of the law, but on its equal application, she declared. The Thorne case forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about implicit bias and institutional failure. The statewide audit of judicial conduct launched in the wake of Judge Reginald Thorne's removal had identified 5 other judges with similar patterns of discriminatory sentencing. 2 resigned rather than face investigation. 3 others were contesting the findings, but their cases in court had been reassigned pending review. This isn't about punishing individual judges, explained Judicial Ethics Director Lydia Voss during a panel discussion at the State Bar Association. It's about healing a system that has lost the public's trust. Every biased ruling damages faith in justice itself. New requirements cascaded through the system. All judges must now complete implicit bias training annually. Sentencing data is published quarterly, searchable by demographics to identify disparities. A citizen review panel adds community oversight to judicial appointments, ensuring diverse perspectives in evaluation. At the Sterling Hotel, transformation took a different form. The corporate headquarters instituted comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for all staff. More significantly, they established the Future Leaders Scholarship for underprivileged youth interested in hospitality management and business leadership. We're honored to have Ms. Harper serve as student advisor to our scholarship board, announced the hotel's new diversity officer during the program's launch. Her insight has been invaluable in creating opportunities that truly serve our community's needs. Nyla's research continued to expand, now supported by a grant from the State University's Department of Criminal Justice. She presented her findings at the National Conference on Judicial Reform, where her methodology was adopted as a model for community oversight of local courts. What makes Harper's approach so effective, explained Professor Theo Ellison, is that it provides quantifiable metrics for behaviors previously dismissed as subjective perception. When you can demonstrate that a judge interrupts minority defendants 400% more frequently than white defendants, bias becomes difficult to deny. The state legislature passed the Judicial Accountability Act with rare bipartisan support. Governor Harlan Pierce signed it in a ceremony where Nyla stood among the dignitaries. Key provisions included mandatory recording of all court proceedings, transparent sentencing guidelines, and an independent review process for complaints of judicial misconduct. This legislation ensures that what happened in Judge Reginald Thorne's courtroom never happens again, the governor declared. Equal justice under law isn't just a phrase we carve on courthouse walls, it's a promise we must keep. Former defendants from Judge Reginald Thorne's court saw tangible results from the reforms. A special review panel examined over 300 cases, resulting in dozens of overturned convictions and reduced sentences. A class action lawsuit against the county resulted in a settlement fund for those whose lives were derailed by Judge Reginald Thorne's discriminatory practices. I lost 3 years of my life for something a white kid got probation for, explained Malik Turner, released after his sentence was reviewed. I can't get that time back, but at least now people believe what we've been saying for years. Law schools across the state updated their ethics curriculum to include the Thorne case as a cautionary example. Bar exam questions now test understanding of judicial bias and attorney obligations to report misconduct. As Nyla prepared for high school graduation, a letter arrived bearing the presidential seal, an invitation to join a special White House commission on criminal justice reform. 1 year after the fateful day in Judge Reginald Thorne's courtroom, Nyla stood at the podium in the courtroom 3, now renamed the Equal Justice Chamber. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the diverse crowd gathered for Judge Celine Patterson's inauguration ceremony. When I entered a courtroom last year, Nyla began, I couldn't have imagined standing here today. I simply wanted to document what I saw to prove that the disparities in our justice system weren't just anecdotal, but measurable realities affecting real lives. Judge Celine Patterson, a former public defender known for her commitment to fair treatment, smiled encouragingly from her position near the bench she would soon occupy. The wooden seat, once Judge Reginald Thorne's throne of prejudice, had been replaced with a new design, slightly lower, facing the gallery directly rather than looming above it. Justice isn't a concept that belongs to judges or lawyers, Nyla continued. It belongs to all of us. And when it fails any of us, it fails all of us. Dr. Naomi Ellis approached the podium after Nyla's speech, announcing an expansion of the National Merit Scholarship Program. We've created a special track for students interested in legal and judicial reform, she explained. Our first cohort includes young people from diverse backgrounds, united by their passion for improving the system. The scholarship recipients stood for recognition, 20 students whose faces reflected the community's true diversity. Each wore a pin bearing the scales of justice, slightly tilted, but in the process of rebalancing. The courthouse itself bore little resemblance to the intimidating institution of a year ago. Hallways displayed information about rights and resources in 8 languages. Community liaisons in bright blue vests helped visitors navigate the court process. A monitor in the lobby displayed the quarterly review of sentencing data, transparent for all to evaluate. The building hasn't changed, Darius Harper observed to his daughter as they toured the renovated spaces. But everything inside it has. Judge Reginald Thorne had faded from public view, his disbarment finalized after he chose not to contest the ethics violations. The civil penalties from class action lawsuits claimed most of his assets. Former colleagues who enabled his behavior had undergone mandatory retraining or been replaced. Bryce Langford, the prosecutor from Nyla's case, now worked with the Ethics Committee, helping identify problematic patterns in other jurisdictions. I was complicit through my silence, he admitted during a training session for new prosecutors. That's a burden I'll always carry. Darius Harper had found his own path forward, establishing a support network for parents whose children face court proceedings. Navigating the system shouldn't require a law degree, he explained to a group of nervous parents gathered in a community center. Knowledge is power, especially in a courtroom. Nyla herself stood at a crossroads of opportunity. Acceptance letters from prestigious universities covered her kitchen table, each offering full scholarships. She had decided to study law with a focus on judicial ethics and reform. Her original notebook, containing the observations that catalyzed systemic change, had been requested by the State Historical Society for their Civil Rights Archive. In her final act before leaving for university, Nyla visited her high school, speaking to students in the same classroom where her research project began. "I never set out to take down a judge or become an activist," she told the attentive teenagers. "I simply documented what I saw, consistently and meticulously. I stood firm when it would have been easier to back down." She held up a new notebook identical to her original one. "This is still my most powerful tool, not because it contains anything special, but because it represents a commitment to truth, no matter how uncomfortable." The students leaned forward as she delivered her final thought, words that would soon appear on posters in courthouses throughout the state. Justice isn't automatic. It requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to stand firm when faced with injustice.